a lot of different ways to use your law degree. Obviously, professor, politician, lobbyist, nonprofits. There's, some of them use attorneys on a kind of a consultant basis. There's actually a trend now with nonprofits to hire counsel, in-house counsel, that don't just deal, sometimes they just deal with their normal employment issues, tax issues, things like that. But more and more they're hiring kind of litigation departments to deal with animal issues, which is actually a very exciting new trend in animal law. There's law enforcement. It's great to have people with a background in animal legal issues who are actually investigating cruelty or special agent for wildlife. It's a problem in animal law to have people in law enforcement or with DAs or prosecutors that they don't sometimes take it as seriously as we would hope that they would. USDA inspectors, you can work on the inside. A lot of federal statutes that we'll get into later, they're enforced by the USDA. And so it's great to have people that are kind of have animal-friendly bent to them in those roles in terms of the Animal Welfare Act, Humane Slaughter Act. It's in research, circuses, anything that deals with animals. It's actually a good role to have animal-friendly people there. And authors, philosophers. It's just a wide range of different professions that can intersect with animal law. So there are kind of some basic different areas of legal practice, and these are actually laid out pretty well in the overview of the law. And so I was going to go through some major tracks. There are criminal law and civil law are kind of two major practices. And so criminal law is, you can kind of know like murder, burglary, those sorts of things that are, things that are on behalf of the state. So, and it's they prosecute the crime, so it's not in between two individuals, but it's prosecuted either by a district attorney or a city prosecutor, depending on the different level of where the crime was committed. And this is where you kind of see the courtroom dramas, and that's really not what the law is about, actually. It's not quite so cut and dry, in 30 minutes you don't get, the big conclusion. But this is kind of, when you see your courtroom dramas, it's all about, beyond a reasonable doubt. And then so people that are in criminal law, prosecutors, public defenders, private attorneys, and a lot, defending activists is also kind of in there too, and law enforcement. So there's definitely a way for you to be involved with the law on the criminal side. The prosecutors and judges and media, they need to know that this is important to you. And it's great to call them. You hear about something horrible that happened in the newspaper or whatever. They're actually open to hearing from you and hearing your opinion about what they should do about it. And it can be a really kind of, if they have a lot of pressure to try to not plea bargain or sentence them for longer, it's a great role that you can play to have more prosecutions of animal cruelty and abuse. This is an amazing website, www.petabuse.com. It's a great database of different animal cruelty things that are going on. Tells you ways to get involved, and you can actually look and see, if your neighbor is or your new boyfriend has been convicted of animal cruelty. It's sometimes a good resource for that as well. Civil law. This is kind of where the vast majority of animal law developments are taking place. And if you hear of somebody saying that they're an animal law attorney or they're practicing an animal law practice, this is most likely what they're doing. And this is a lawsuit between two parties, so the government isn't involved. Somebody hires an attorney and to bring a case on their behalf, and in most cases it is a companion animal. And these are based on statutes and common law, so it's also, there are laws that civil law attorneys depend on to be able to bring cases forward. But it's also, this is where a lot of judge-made law is, and this is where a lot of advancements are made, because if you look at 100 years of this is how we've treated animals, and non-economic damages or things like that you'll hear, animals as property. Judges can be, they can change the laws, and they can be brave and push forward and realize that how society views animals is much differently than how the law treats them. And so this is where some really exciting things are happening in animal law. This one is the standard is lower. Preponderance of evidence, it's more 51 to 49. So that's why kind of a classic example is the OJ trial, where he wasn't convicted criminally, but he was found liable civilly, because the burden of proof is different. And then, so in the criminal law realm, back to that world, if you're found guilty of a crime, you're paying a fine to the government, or you're going to jail. In civil law, it's a recovery of damages, or to try to get some sort of, to stop somebody from doing something. So in the veterinary malpractice realm, you would think like, okay, your animal got hurt. Damages that you can get are either the cost of your dog, which is economic damages, and that's kind of a struggle too of what is this dog worth in economic, or cat worth in economic terms. A lot of states say market value. There are a lot of different states, including Oregon, that you can try to recover special value, so that it's up to the attorney to say, yeah, you can get a black lab for $100, but that this particular black lab is worth much more to this family. So that's the damages. And then in terms of injunction or equity, kind of an example that something that we work with a lot is kind of nuisance laws. In terms of people having, like if you live next door to a hoarder and they have 100 animals, how do you, kind of use the law and nuisance laws in a creative way to make sure they don't own those animals. And animals are property. It's a little bit of a benefit, and as many of you know, it's kind of something that people are struggling to kind of change that classification. And I think the law is slowly but surely recognizing that although animals are property, they can be treated differently than you do a couch or a car or whatever else. And some laws don't really recognize that they're living sentient beings. And I won't tell you too many little war stories, but the recent case I had with the veterinary malpractice case asking for non-economic damages, went into the courtroom and the judge said, taking your dog to the veterinarian is like taking your TV to a repair person. And it's, you take it in, they fix it or they don't, and you just get a new one. And so that's kind of the paradigm that we're working within, but to try to let them know that, yeah, you can have an owner and you can have those protections, because actually if animals weren't owned, you wouldn't have standing to bring a veterinary malpractice case, because you're not really representing the animal. You're representing the owner of the animal who's hurt. So there is ways to actually that can benefit animals and the advancement of animal law. But judges really need to be, and the laws need to better reflect that it's a much different situation, because your TV is broken. You look at how much would I pay to fix it, and and you look at just mostly the economics of it. You might have a little bit of attachment to like your very first TV or something, but it's very different than how you would an animal. And people spend $20,000 on hip surgery or kidney dialysis or those sorts of things. It's not a rational economic decision that people make. It's based more on their love and affection and relationship with the animal, rather than is this cost-benefit relationship or this cost-benefit analysis in your favor. So, okay. So civil practice. These are kind of personal injury and tort. Sometimes it's a kind of a very, very traditional and kind of very common area of practice for animal law attorneys. And these are just some examples of some different cases and different theories that animal law attorneys are pursuing. There's also contract law. Obviously, as owners, there's contracts in terms of breeders or shipping or any sort of anything that kind of involves animals. Puppy lemon laws are another kind of advancement. If you think of lemon laws in terms of cars, if you buy a car and you have a guarantee that it's some certain condition, and you get home and it's not that condition, you can take your car back or get your money back. Some states have these lemon laws, but they don't work that well for puppies because you come home and you fall in love with it within 5 minutes, and you don't want to get another puppy. So it's kind of one of those instances where things are advancing in terms of recognizing that people need to have, breeders need to be held to a higher standard, but it's an area where the law doesn't necessarily treat animals the way that they should. Again, and then insurance. Insurance comes up a lot in. Oh yeah. What's a tort? Okay, that's a very good question. That is the area of law. And it's mostly referred to as personal injury. It's, you kind of think of car crashes, anything like that, and it's that you deal. It kind of goes through in the civil law as well. There's negligence, just kind of being careless. So you're driving down the road and you have your coffee and your cell phone and all those things, and so and all of a sudden a kid runs out in front of you, and then so you're kind of, that would be a tort in terms of your act to them being careless. Or a kid runs across the street and you ram into them. That's intentional, So, but it's just there's contracts, like how your relationship with people, and then there's torts in the harms that go on between your relationships with people. So I don't know if that answers your question as well. Or Jordy, you want to jump in? Yeah, it's really about the relationships between people, and it's kind of the carelessness for the harm that you cause them. Does that make sense? There is, in that there are civil trials and criminal trials. So in the civil sense, you're still going through the same, the steps of a trial, and if you just look at Multnomah County in Portland, if you sue under a certain amount, you go into arbitration, and there's different steps to go through, which means you don't go to trial because it's such a low amount of money, but you try to work it out in a different, different setting. But it's still, you file a complaint and you kind of lay out all the things that you think that person did to harm you. And then you have damages, either monetary or you want to ask them to stop or to do something. But it's not based on something of, here, I wrote out this contract, you were supposed to sell me, this car, and you didn't do it. And so they'd be based on that agreement that you have that's written out. This is more just kind of society has these, rules set out in terms of how you're supposed to behave, and if you're not meeting those behaviors. Yeah. So then that's kind of goes between the, the two. Landlord-tenant issues, a lot, the American with Disabilities Act comes up a lot in this as well, in terms of, and just the ADA in general, in terms of access of service animals, and where they can go and what they can do, and landlord-tenant issues. You hear a lot of that with, renters agreements or condominiums. Who's able to have pets at what point, and can they change those rules? And what if you have, weight restrictions and all those sorts of things. Animal law attorneys get involved in those issues as well. Estate planners, there's a lot of stuff happening with pet trusts. So now people can care for their animal, make sure that their animals are cared for after they die. And that's been, it was hard in the past, but with animals as being property, you normally can't leave property for property. You can't leave money for your property. But there are now some exemptions on the federal and different state levels that allow you to do that. So there are some estate planners that, this is kind of a very traditional area of law where you can see with both estate planning and family law, where you have people that just do traditional area of law but then have pet or animal issues in their practice, but they're not just pet trust attorneys. That is a good thing. And then obviously family law, custody issues. There are a lot of different ownership disputes between companion animals, and that's another area that judges weren't very happy to see in their courtrooms, and some still aren't. Most family law judges are now allowing people to deal they can decide if you want to have Fluffy every other week or every other month, and you guys can privately decide to do that. But if you breach that agreement, they don't want to get involved. But it's interesting to hear from family law attorneys that a lot of times that's the crux in a divorce is what happens to the family pets. So it's a really important issue that I think family law practitioners and judges are really going to have to just really start considering. Okay, so like I said, there's some very traditional areas of law that animal law is based on. One of those is the Constitution, and these come up in terms of, and you kind of hear about police shootings. Adam's talking about that a little bit next door, and you can kind of look at his materials in here as well. And it's kind of a sad story you hear on the news every once in a while about police shooting dogs. Free speech comes up a lot with hunter harassment, protests, civil rights. It's kind of a very interesting area of law as well. Kind of hear about these civil rights issues in terms of people in prison who, they don't want to eat the government or whatever, the prison issued food. And is that, do they have a right to say that this is part of their religion or part of, those sorts of, is that part of their civil rights to be able to ask for different types of food? And hunter harassment, there are actually some laws that say that, if you're out in the woods with a hunter, you cannot, wave your arms, jump around, blow your horn. You're interfering with hunters' rights to hunt. And so that's actually an area that animal law lawyers work on as well. And standing is always an issue. Standing is if you have the ability to bring a lawsuit. Either you're harmed, and it really is if you're harmed. And there are laws such as the Animal Welfare Act or Humane Slaughter Act that don't allow citizens to pursue lawsuits. So you can know that, you can see a violation of the Humane Slaughter Act and say you didn't render this animal unconscious and free it from pain before you slaughtered it. But just because you saw it and you don't like that it happened, you don't have the ability to bring a lawsuit to try to enforce it. And animals don't have standing in the court either. So, you can't say, well, as a lawyer, I'm representing this cow that was inhumanely slaughtered. And so that is actually very interesting, and it comes a lot within, kind of discussing the theory and why do people, why have we classified animals as property and separate from, we have this big wall between the animal world and from us. And, but if they're living beings, why can't they have their interests represented? And an argument for that is to have like guardian ad litem, like you do for children. Children aren't able to represent themselves, but we designate someone to represent their interests in court. It's something that animal law attorneys are working on as well. So a really big intersection between animal law and environmental law comes in kind of these environmental statutes. Some of them are written, especially, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. They're not necessarily to protect animals, but they certainly derive some benefit from them. And it kind of a big difference between environmental law and animal laws. With environmental law, there's a much more of a focus on the species as a whole, and animal law really looks at the animals as an individual. And so, through all of these, they kind of look at, under NEPA, the government has to do kind of an environmental impact statement and see, what the harms would be. If we cut down 100 trees, what would it do to the water? How many animals would it kill? All those things. And it's not like we shouldn't kill the animals. It's, if we have 10 that are killed, what will it do to the population? Where, an animal law perspective would much more be, well, you shouldn't kill one at all. And it comes up a lot in international issues as well. If you think of like elephants in Africa, there's arguments that, well, if we allow them to poach these elephants for their ivory, they are now an economic commodity, so therefore people will want to save them. And so, is that okay? Is it okay to sacrifice, 10 elephants a year to be poached for their ivory, thinking that, well, that will mean that 100 more will be saved because we want to keep them around? I obviously don't agree with that analysis, but it's it's an interesting obstacle for animal law attorneys to deal with, especially in the environmental context of how do we balance, the no killing of life with the reality of what's going on in the world and animals being treated as economic commodities. Administrative law. This is government agencies kind of fall under administrative law. So anytime there's any sort of agency action, that is what's going on. You think of the USDA or Food and Drug Administration. Those are, or the FCC, those are federal agencies. And they actually propose rules and regulations, and they're available on that website. And you can do searches for certain things. You can put in certain keywords. And like the USDA with the food pyramid or any sort of action they want to do, it's up there for comment, for public comment. So what a lot of law firms do, and animal groups such as the Fund for Animals or HSUS or Myron Glitzenstein, who's a great law firm, they'll go into these, and they'll comment on government actions. And then if they are unhappy with what the government is doing, that creates standing for them to go forward to say, we commented, we had all of our, we let you know what we wanted you to do, and this is why we think you weren't doing it right, and therefore they can then sue them later. And another area of law that animal law attorneys deal with is kind of open government. There are state and federal Freedom of Information Acts. There's FOIA, that's kind of the acronym for it, and it allows you to get an amazing amount of information from the government because they work for you. So therefore, you should have that information. Unfortunately, there are some exemptions. They like to black out everything that actually you want to see. So you'll ask for a letter, and kind of if you guys also Fahrenheit 9/11, you kind of saw that that was a FOIA request that they did, and then all the stuff about George Bush and his past military action was blacked out, and that's the good stuff. But what sometimes, if they give you not the photocopy, but the original copy, you can hold it up to the light and you can still read it. So, sure, all the tips. And obviously, animal law isn't, there's not a really strong foundation without animal laws as through the legislature. So in your materials, there's a little cute diagram about how a bill becomes a law. And I'm sure most of you learned this in high school through your government class. But what I hope all of you know is that you have an amazing ability to influence all of these steps. And it's a great way to have your voice heard. Again, your legislators, they represent you. And you need to let them know what your beliefs are and why you're voting for them, either because they are really animal friendly or you're not voting for them because they're not. And you can testify at hearings, always write to them, meet with them. There's this, if you write a letter to your legislator, they count that as you're representing about 5,000 other people that aren't taking the time to write. So it's a great way to have your voice heard. And writing is a lot more effective than emails. And calling them and meeting with them is the most powerful thing that you can do, because they recognize that you're taking time out of your life to drive down to your capital to meet with them, and they don't have a lot of people that come in, and so you'll really make a strong statement by actually going down there. And then if you have ballot initiatives in your state, like we do in Oregon, that's a great way to make sure that there are animal-friendly laws that are getting passed as well. Oh, sure. Yeah, it depends. And it is kind of, they can look at those at a little bit at the same level. And an email that has your own words is much more effective than, here's an internet petition that's going around and you just fill in your name, or if you just cut and paste. So they know, if they get 500 emails that all look the same, they're not going to be kind of given as much weight as if you wrote either a personal email or a phone call. They do. And I don't know exactly if it's the level of if a phone call equals an email. And I think each legislator does it a little bit differently. But it's kind of a little bit of the same sort of weight. And but it's, a meeting with your legislator is not going to be treated as one mark as an email would. I'm sorry. Oh, torts in the glossary. Oh, good, yeah. So take a look through the glossary for very succinct definitions of different things. And hopefully that'll help you with that throughout the weekend, too, as you sit in on some kind of heavier law panels. I'm hoping that this glossary of definitions can kind of help answer some of your questions. Humane Lines is it's a weekly email that you can get through. It's the Humane Society of the United States, Government Affairs Department, and Fund for Animals put this out every week, and it's great. It's just a little snippet of little things to do, super easy, lay it out for you, but it's a really effective way to be part of kind of some major things going on locally and nationally. And you can just go to hsus.org and go to Government Affairs or type in Humane Lines. So there are different levels of laws. They start out kind of on the local municipal level. So a good example of that is kind of animal control type issues of, does your dog bark too much? Are dogs at large? But they also kind of range beyond companion animal issues as well. State statutes, probably the most common one that you guys are familiar with is the Animal Anti-Cruelty Statutes, and that governs kind of abuse and neglect of animals. It's great in the sense that, of course, all animals should be free from abuse and neglect. It falls short for a number of reasons. They were originally passed really, again, to protect ownership interests and also kind of preserve, the moral fabric of our society, because it's not so much that it was hurting the animals as that it was hurting the people that were witnessing it. Interestingly enough, they really started more protecting livestock and farm animals almost exclusively. And then as it progressed, now all anti-cruelty statutes are really focused on companion animals, dogs and cats, which is a good thing because we all love them very much, but it exempts hunting, fishing, scientific research, slaughter, how you raise an animal. Anything that people use animals for on any sort of economic level is exempted from an anti-cruelty statute. So, and again, it's great that animals are protected, have some protections, but just like if it's illegal to, bash in a dog's head, it's illegal to bash in somebody's windshield. But you're not giving the windshield rights, just like anti-cruelty statutes don't give animals rights. It does protect them in some sense, but not probably as much as people would hope. And again, prosecutors on the city, state, and federal level, they have, it's called prosecutorial discretion. So they get to decide what they prosecute on behalf of the state. And so it's really up to those offices in terms of what their priorities are. So to have DAs and city prosecutors and whatever else to understand that animal cruelty is really important for the animals and people, there's a lot of evidence that to show the connection between the balance between animals and people, and they need to hear from you that it's important as well, because they're dealing with murder and drugs and rape, and all those things that we also feel are really important to be prosecuted, the animals need to also kind of be part of, the level of importance that they should be as well. And these are kind of the basic federal statutes that protect animals. Animal Welfare Act is kind of the federal anti-cruelty statute. But again, it exempts a lot of behaviors. And both the Animal Welfare Act, and the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, that really deals with how they're slaughtered, that they should be rendered unconscious, but not how they're raised at all. And how they're raised is much more of a state issue, and those are common husbandry practices. Anything that's a common husbandry practice is pretty much exempt, but that is defined by the industry. So the industry says, we allow forced molting, we allow cutting off the beaks with hot wire without anesthesia, we allow 8 chickens in a wire cage this big, we castrate without anesthesia. I mean, all these things, they're common, so they're okay. And obviously they're not okay, but under the law, they're okay. And so that's a big thing that needs to change. And with the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, it also it governs, mostly large livestock. It doesn't include poultry, which is a little over 90% of the animals that are slaughtered. So there's obviously a lot of gaps in the law for protections for animals. And again, the wildlife laws. And there are issues with enforcement and funding. Both of these statutes are enforced by the USDA, who have some economic interests in making sure that there aren't more protections. And also they don't have a lot of people. And they govern, these are all the places where they're supposed to go. Federal research, breeders, circuses, roadside zoos. The list goes on and on and on of all the places that these people are supposed to regulate and enforce and to visit. And it includes, zoos, SeaWorld, all of them. And they're, a limited, handful of people in each state that are going around and making sure people are complying with these statutes. So that's another thing that's being worked on the federal level, is to get them more funding. And that's all that I have to share. Here's my contact information at both the National Center for Animal Law, which is here at Lewis and Clark, and then I also practice law down in Portland as well. But I'm sure you guys have some questions, so I'll take some questions. No questions? Okay. So, these are very specific questions. I might have to get back to you on a more specific answer, but to sell live animals? I'm going to have to get back to you on that, unless does somebody else know the answer to that? Jordan, do you know? It depends on the context. If you are part of a nonprofit organization and or an individual that's concerned, you can certainly use animal lawyers as a resource. We don't have a Rolodex of laws in our head, but we can do research to help you. So on any sort of issue that you're concerned with, we can help research the answer. On an individual level, it's really more of if you or your companion animal is harmed in any way, either from a neighbor, from a vet, from somebody, the delivery truck running down the street, and it is a lot easier for the law to advance for companion animals, but we got a phone call about fish, about a woman whose fish were killed by her ex-boyfriend. And so fish are, they're included in an anti-cruelty statute. As a private attorney, we don't, the state would prosecute kind of the cruelty aspect under anti-cruelty statute, but, as a lawyer, you can file a lawsuit and pursue that. What's hard is that sometimes it's not very practical economically, and what's really been hard in terms of animal law practice is sometimes, economically, it isn't always the best decision to make. But if for a principle of it and for advancing the law, it's something that you can kind of play your part as well. But unfortunately, to hire an attorney to do something civilly, it costs money, even on a contingency basis, which most attorneys take cases either. Well, there's kind of three ways. Is a flat fee of, okay, we'll get you from beginning to end for X amount of dollars. A contingency basis, which is at the end, the attorney will recover a portion or percentage of whatever you recover, but the client is also responsible for costs of kind of getting there. So it's a little bit of a gamble for the attorney. And then the other way is on an hourly basis. And so for a lot of issues, a lot of the animal issues and kind of the newer issues, the only way that we can do it is really on an hourly basis, which can add up to be quite, the animal law attorneys deal with a whole wide range. Pet trusts, somebody steals your dog, but any kind of harm that's done to you or your animal. But what's hard is we get a lot of phone calls too of somebody that's like, I know of somebody down the street whose cat was killed. What can I do? I feel bad about it. What can I do? And we can't do anything for that person who feels bad about it. It really has to be that person who is harmed that we can help in that sort of situation. Yeah, there are, at the, in law libraries, they have some newsletters and things that are printed that kind of come down with decisions. And there are, FindLaw is a FINDLAW.com. It's, kind of the two major legal databases that lawyers use are Westlaw and LexisNexis. And those are also, if you, as a private person, you can put in your credit card and pay $500 an hour or whatever to get that information. But FindLaw was established as an alternative to that for attorneys, but also it'd probably be a good resource as well. But it really depends, too, on if you want local or state, federal, administrative decisions. There's kind of different databases for, kind of different levels. Yeah. It's a new, but just for animal organizations? Oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. I don't know a lot about New York law, and especially, kind of that nonprofit, but there are, what's a kind of interesting development is kind of related to that is that there are some state statutes that allow for private prosecution of laws, and so they've delegated that role to humane societies, or I'm sure in New York to the ASPCA, to be able to so it doesn't have to be a DA or from they're specialized kind of private prosecutors. So I would imagine that, if it was a case of animal cruelty, you as an organization really wouldn't be able to sue, because it would really, normally it would be the DA or the DA's office that would do that. And so now it's been, I guess, regulated to the ASPCA that they're able to do that as well. So even if it wasn't in your bylaws or your articles of incorporation, my gut feeling, without knowing much about it, is that you wouldn't be able to prosecute the animal cruelty statute anyways. But if they're restricting you from bringing a civil lawsuit, that's kind of a different matter. You might want to talk to your attorney about that. Because if it's something that is harm done to you or your members, that's kind of a different situation. Yeah. Well, the owners of the dogs, they would certainly have a case to try to bring forward that their animals were killed and harmed. Is there a duty to make sure that the dog is dead? You could certainly argue it. What's interesting in animal law, there's not really a lot of cut and dry, like, this is on this side and this is on this side. Lawyers, they can argue anything. So, but is there an obligation? It really depends on for the animal control, what their mandate is, and it's pretty specific. But yeah, if somebody wanted to bring an action saying that they didn't reasonably follow up or they didn't properly, I don't know about the disposal laws of in terms of dogs. There are a lot of different creative ways to pull some issues, some legal issues out of that scenario. In Oregon. ahead, Carter. Right, I'm sure it was. Good. Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Carter. Okay. Um, yeah, I can go into a little bit, but the next panel, Mindy Kursban, is doing an Animal Welfare Act 101, and she's going to go all, no, that's okay. You didn't study the whole schedule yet? No. So yeah, actually a lot of the topics I talked about will kind of be explored further, and there's some, yeah, attorneys working on those issues as well. So, sure. Yeah. I think the lemon laws also, I mean, it definitely goes towards just kind of the proliferation of too many companion animals, and it sounds like with the llamas as well. But also to try to help with the inbreeding, because obviously a lot of those genetic diseases come from animals that are inbred, too often. So, but go adopt. What's that? Yeah, yeah. Good. Well, I'm glad you're all here for the weekend, and feel free to grab me for anything, coffee, tea, questions about animal law. And